and he has issued a statement, and I just want to play for you his the audio version of his statement. Of course, it's voiced by him, so he just read his statement and sent it to media for publication. So here he is commenting on the Cooper spend matter, what he believes the Prime Minister ought to do, what both himself and the PNP believe the Prime Minister ought to do, or ought to do, and the basis on which he believes the Prime Minister ought to act. Here's Dennis Smithers.
The People's National Party is calling on Prime Minister Andrew Holness, in his capacity as Minister with responsibility for housing, to publicly confirm that a long-standing caveat on the Cooper spent property will be enforced following the demolition of approximately 20 homes that left more than 40 residents without shelter. The demolition took place in the early hours of Tuesday, August 11, when heavy equipment and bailiff, accompanied by a large police contingent, tore down the homes without prior notice to residents, many of whom had lived on the said lands for decades. Our research revealed that a caveat number 1759455 was lodged on the property on May 1, 2012 by the Minister of Housing under the People's National Party administration led by the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, recording the ministry's equitable interest in the land. The caveat remains on the certificate of title, meaning that the property cannot be lawfully be dealt with without the consent of the sitting Minister of Housing, a role now held by no greater mortal than the Honorable Prime Minister. The Prime Minister cannot claim distance from this tragedy when his own ministry holds a record interest in this very land. Families are sleeping under tents while he stays silent. We are calling on him to state clearly and publicly that this caveat will be upheld and to outline exactly what his government intends to do to provide shelter or resettle these Jamaicans. We are demanding immediate emergency shelter, a clear resettlement timeline, full public disclosure of the government's role, and that the administration invoke the Local Improvements Community Amenities Act to protect and regularize the rights of the current occupants.
That's Dennis Meadows. He's the constituency chairman of the PNP's organization in Northern Trelawney. And his statement came to me moments before the show. And the basis of his intervention is to say, listen, that caveat number 1759455, which was lodged on the property in question, May 1, 2012, by the Minister of Housing under the PNP administration. Housing at that time would have been handled by Dr. Maurice Guy, former Central St. Mary MP. And that action, Dennis Meadows said, recorded the housing ministry's equitable interest in the land. Dennis Meadows says the caveat remains on the certificate of title, and he says that has the effect of ensuring that the property cannot lawfully be dealt with without the consent of whomever the Minister of Housing is. Therefore, he's putting it squarely at the Prime Minister's feet, because he says the Prime Minister, of course, is the Minister of Housing now. And he says the Prime Minister, I'm quoting him, the Prime Minister cannot not claim distance from this tragedy when his own ministry holds a recorded interest in this very land. And he says families are sleeping on the tents while the Prime Minister stays silent. The PNP is calling on him to state clearly and publicly that this caveat will be upheld and to outline exactly what his government intends to do to shelter and resettle these Jamaicans. The words of Dennis Meadows, the PNP chairman, of the PNP's constituency organization in Northern Trelawney. Let's take the break and come right back. This is Cliff Hughes Online. Relevant to matters that are consuming public attention. Clearly, the Cooper's Pen matter is one that fits the bill any way you want to hold the bill. And that statement that we just played from Dennis Meadows, necessary to play it, I think, because it sets out the basis on which the opposition, PNP, is expecting the Prime Minister to act. But just a few questions here. I notice in the statement, Meadows doesn't say, or perhaps he expects us to take as given, that the perspective he has given is a legal opinion, one. Well, let me stay there first, because if it's a legal opinion, we all know that doesn't make it sound, because you can have 50 trillion legal opinions. Which of them will be upheld by a court is another matter entirely, but is it a legal opinion? One. And then two, if it is that I own land, that there's a caveat on, following Dennis Meadows' reasoning. If I own land as a private developer or a private citizen, and the government has a caveat on that land, and Dennis Meadows is saying, based on the strength of the caveat, the government can do certain things with the land. What would prevent me as a private owner from also doing certain things with the land? And if, as his statement is suggesting, those things that the government can do with the land through its caveat doesn't necessarily involve the input of the private developer, or it can act outside the wishes of the private owner because of that caveat, why can the private owner not act outside of what the caveat says and perhaps gives the government the power to do? Is what I'm saying? So the statement is necessary to publish, because it grounds again on what basis is the opposition calling on the Minister of Housing to act. We've seen that clearly. So we've seen what they say informs their perspective about the course of action that should be taken. But then that course of action or that basis has to be interrogated. Is the plinth solid? And the very few questions I've asked so far strike at the heart of that. What is the effect of the government having a caveat on land that I own? And what gives a government the right to act based on the strength of that caveat, but at the same time ties my hands from doing what I want to do with my land? So these are the questions that must be answered, because the fact of a caveat and the opinion as articulated by Dennis Meadows do not by themselves mean that the private owner's interests are ancillary or subsidiary to the actions and the potential actions of any government. That's just my view. And, you know, they say opinions are like, you know where, everybody has one. Legal opinions are of a higher level, but, you know, lawyers differ. So there you go. And then, of course, it goes to an independent arbiter, independent finder of fact, to settle the matter one way or the other. But that's just something to consider. On the point of the detention, you know, that troubled me from the start. But if you notice, since this issue became hot button, I have said nothing publicly about the detention of the men. I've seen videos with a man who represents himself in the video as an attorney. I don't know if he is, so I'm not trying to throw shade on him or anything. I wouldn't do that to an attorney at law or any professional for that matter. It's bad form. I'm a human being, and respect is the least I can give. It costs me nothing, so I wouldn't do that. But I don't know if he is. I didn't see a name either, so I couldn't ask someone if this gentleman is a lawyer. But in the video, he represented himself as if he was an attorney, and he was with a group of men who were giving accounts of being detained in Cooper's Pen and moved before the demolition happened. Now, what I have said this week is that men were moved out, and I pursued the line of argument to say, well, if people don't believe, if it went like that the detention of men who would perhaps provide resistance to attempts to clear the land, if that wasn't a smart thing to do to de-escalate the situation or to remove agents of escalation from the community so that the work of the demolition crew supervised by the security forces could happen. I did go along with that line, but I didn't comment on the specific matter of the detention itself because in my mind, there were questions I needed answered. Yesterday, an eminent journalist called to ask, George, is this really so? And I said, this is a spark to check further. So when I checked, this is what I was made to understand. And again, it's the account that I've been given, I'm sharing with you. It is my understanding that two things happened in Cooper's Pen on Tuesday morning. One, the police conducted an operation between about 1 a.m. and about 4 a.m. That operation was for persons of interest, or stronger than that, suspects in criminal matters, and that several men were detained. As I've said on this program, Cooper's Pen is somewhere I know rather well. I have family there, so it's not somewhere I have to ask someone about the nature of the community or wherever, whatever. Yeah, I've known about Cooper's Pen. From Cooper's Pen was where the people left from to go work at the then Trelawney Beach Hotel. At the time, a little boy, as country people would say, a little boy, for my friends who are not at home with the vernacular. Yeah, Trelawney Beach Hotel. So anybody who knows, say, oh, Trelawney Beach Hotel, a long time back. Yeah, that's how long I've known of Cooper's Pen. Family there, as I've said. So I know the nature of the community. Yeah, it's not a teddy bear community. Okay, good. So the police operation there for those between 1 and 4 a.m., that happened. I'm being told that the demolition crew with their court supervisor, because that's how the process has to work, and the police came after 6. So I said, huh? So I said, hold on. But the residents say that the demolition crew with the tractors came before day, before dawn, pre-dawn. 6 a.m. is not pre-dawn. 6 a.m. sun hot out to do. But the residents say, yeah man, from 3 o'clock. So I've heard people say from 3 a.m. the tractor them come. And I said, no, the tractors couldn't have come at 3 a.m. Because based on how the law works, you can't do something like that outside of the hours where the court-approved person to supervise the demolition, a court-appointed person to supervise the demolition, is available. And who's going to get out of them bed before they to come and do something like that? They'd come early because of the likelihood that, it won't create a traffic snarl depending on where the demolition is taking place. The opportunity for violence and bad blood, you do it early, and you try to get out before things get really hot, literally and figuratively. So I'm told, and I'm sharing with you, I'm not telling you that you must believe it. It was said to me by people who I trust and have confidence in, and I'm sharing it with you. But as ever, you weigh and balance it yourself. So one police operation, different team unconnected to the demolition people, came and did, as part of their cordon and search and operation, they went in and they detained who they detained. So I'm being told that it has nothing to do with the demolition team which came after 6. And the narrative that men were taken out strategically so that they wouldn't be in Cooper Spring when the demolition crew came. I'm told that no, absolutely not. Nonsense. I'm being told that it was purely coincidental. So I said, They said, well, yes. And I checked further. In media, you get information from one source. You come 1, 2, 3 more. You satisfy yourself. If the information bears out, you can go forward and you can articulate publicly. And that's what I was told. So that stands on one side, and on the other side is the claim from people in the community on the ground, members of the opposition as well, that the men were strategically taken out and detained against their will, and they were released conveniently after the demolition exercise had run its course. That's my information. May I say before I go to the break that there was a community meeting in Central St. James on Thursday night. And I hear that the turnout was huge. I'm trying to find my statement here. So it was an NHT event. NHT engages Green Tank and Beirut residents on community formalization. I'm seeing pictures here and video and a statement from those who participated in it. They said the turnout was strong, and it is believed that the turnout by residents of Green Tank and Beirut in Central St. James, Hero Clark's constituency, was because of what happened in Cooper's Pen, and people who occupy lands that they know they didn't buy, they have no title to, and that they captured, but which they have worked hard and put investment in. Block and steel, they've built homes on captured land. But given what happened in Cooper's Pen and the demolition of homes, people were justifiably spooked and said, Lord, same thing could happen to me. So this meeting, which was planned, of course, before this week, but meetings like these don't normally get strong turnout. I hear that the meeting was packed on Thursday. People asking all sorts of questions about getting titles and regularizing their status. Because no one wants to be like the Cooper's Pen many whose homes were destroyed. And I said to my contact, well, this is what representation is about. These are the things that my members of parliament should be doing, organizing these meetings with people who live on captured land to reconcile what are we going to do. The people who own the land, their rights, balanced and not watered down in any way, and the people who've captured the land, what to do about you and your status on captured land. Is it that an arrangement can be struck for you to remain, or do you have to leave? And if you have to leave, where do you go? What happens to the property that you have in concrete on captured land? That's what representation is about. So, Green Tank, Beirut, Central St. James, they had their community meeting. And the NHT even said that, listen, people who were missing from here, you still have a chance to give us your information, give us your details. We're still collecting data so we can know what we're doing where regularization and forward planning is concerned. Because nobody wants to be in their house and hear a tractor outside. Not even a push down, a shove down your property. Or to be at work and hear that come, bulldozer about down your house. Yeah, the Cooper's Pen experience spooking the Central St. James residents into the kind of activism and participation that they would normally give to an event like that meeting on Thursday. More after the break. Dear call.